Sarah Chun had always believed that Tuesdays were the most boring day of the week. Nothing dramatic ever happened on Tuesday. People didn't quit their jobs on Tuesdays, didn't break up with their partners, and certainly didn't meet aliens in the grocery store parking lot. That was before she found herself face-to-face with what appeared to be a 7-foot-tall lizard wearing armor and holding the hand of what was obviously his child. The morning had started normally enough. Sarah had dropped her 8-year-old daughter Emma at school, grabbed her usual coffee from the drive-thru, and headed to Miller's Market to pick up ingredients for tonight's dinner. She was debating between chicken and fish when she heard the commotion outside. The sound was unmistakable, a child crying. But this wasn't the typical tantrum of an overtired toddler. This was the deep, heart-wrenching sob of someone who had lost all hope. Sarah's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She abandoned her shopping cart and headed toward the sound. What she found in the parking lot defied every assumption she had about her quiet suburban life. A massive creature stood beside what appeared to be some kind of spacecraft, though it looked more like a sleek black car that had been stretched and polished to an impossible shine. The creature, alien, her mind supplied helpfully, was clearly male, with dark green scales that caught the morning light, and armor that looked both functional and ceremonial. But it was the smaller figure beside him that captured her attention. The child couldn't have been older than Emma, though he was nearly as tall as Sarah herself. His scales were a lighter green, almost emerald, and he wore what appeared to be a smaller version of the adult's armor. Tears were streaming down his face, leaving tracks on his scaled cheeks, and he was making the most heartbroken sound Sarah had ever heard. "Hey," she said softly, approaching slowly. "Are you okay?" The adult alien spun toward her, his hand moving instinctively to what was clearly a weapon at his side. But when he saw Sarah, a middle-aged woman in jeans and a cardigan, holding a cup of coffee, his posture relaxed slightly. "Greetings, human," he said in English that was heavily accented, but perfectly understandable. "I am Thane Moore of the Valerian Empire. This is my offspring, Zektar. We are having difficulties." Sarah's heart went out to both of them immediately. The adult alien's voice carried a strain she recognized, the tone of a parent who was trying to hold it together for their child's sake, but was close to breaking themselves. "What kind of difficulties?" she asked, setting down her coffee and crouching to bring herself to the child's eye level. "Hey there, Zektar. I'm Sada." The young alien looked up at her with eyes that were startlingly human-like despite their golden color. You're being nice to me," he said wonderingly. "Of course I am," Sarah replied automatically. "You're upset. When someone's upset, especially a kid, you try to help them feel better. That's what people do." Zektar's father made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it held no humor. "That is precisely the problem, Sarah Verth. That is not what people do. Not where we come from." Sarah straightened, studying the adult alien more carefully. His armor bore symbols that suggested rank. She'd seen enough military movies to recognize the signs of authority. But beneath the impressive exterior, she could see exhaustion, frustration, and something that looked remarkably like desperation. "Would you like to talk about it?" she offered. "There's a diner across the street. They make excellent coffee." Famore looked at his son, then back at Sarah. "You would spend time with strangers? Aliens? Without expecting payment or advantage." "You're not strangers," Sarah said firmly. "You're a dad with a problem, and this is your son who's hurting. That's all I need to know." 20 minutes later, they were seated in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, Zektar clutching a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows while his father explained their situation over coffee that was indeed excellent. "The Valerian Empire spans 47 star systems," Thane Moore began. "We are a warrior culture. Strength, conquest, and martial prowess are our highest values. Children are trained from birth to be soldiers. Emotion is weakness. Compassion is failure." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "That sounds difficult." "It is efficient," Thane Moore corrected, though his tone suggested he was repeating something he'd been told rather than expressing his own belief. Or it was until we encountered humanity. He went on to explain that first contact between humans and Valorians had occurred 6 months ago, when a Valerian scouting fleet had intercepted human transmissions, specifically Earth's entertainment broadcasts. What they'd seen had shaken their entire worldview. "Your stories," Thane Moore said, "your movies and television programs, they show families. Parents who love their children without condition. Mothers who comfort offspring when they are hurt, who celebrate their victories, who protect them not because they're useful, but because they are precious. Sarah nodded, not sure where this was going, but increasingly worried about the answer. Zektar saw these transmissions. He began to ask questions. Why did his training supervisor hit him when he cried? Why was he punished for showing concern for injured classmates? Why did no one comfort him when he had nightmares? Sarah's heart broke a little more with each question. She looked at Zektar, who was listening intently while methodically eating marshmallows. I tried to explain our ways, Thane Moore continued. But he asked me the question that I could not answer. Father, do you love me? The alien's voice cracked slightly. I had no words for him because we have no concept for what your species calls love. We have duty, loyalty, utility. But love is alien to us. But not to him, Sarah realized. No, Thane Moore agreed. Exposure to your broadcast has changed him. And he is not alone. Valerie and children across the empire are beginning to exhibit what our leaders call human contamination. They want affection. They want comfort. He gestured helplessly. They want to be loved, Sarah supplied gently. Yes, and our society has no mechanism for providing this. Our leaders believe that military force can suppress these new desires, but they are wrong. You cannot beat love out of someone once they understand what it is. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So what are you doing here? On Earth. Thane Moore looked at his son, then back at Sarah. I have come seeking teachers. Valorians who have learned to love their children. But I'm beginning to understand that what I seek does not exist among my people. These feelings, this capacity for unconditional care, it must be learned from humans. And you want me to? Before Thane Moore could answer, Zektar spoke up for the first time since they'd sat down. I want a mom, he said quietly. A real mom, like in the human stories. Someone who will hug me when I'm scared and tell me I'm brave even when I'm not. Someone who will love me even if I'm weak or scared or just because I exist. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Oh, sweetie, my father tries, Zektar continued. But he doesn't know how. He was never taught. None of us were. He looked up at Sarah with those golden eyes full of hope. But you know how. I can tell. You've been nice to me since the first moment you saw me, and you don't even know me. That's because you're a child, Sarah said automatically. Children deserve kindness and care and love. Always. No matter what. Zektar turned to his father with an expression of pure triumph. See? She understands. Father, we should ask her. We should ask her to teach us. Thane Moore looked embarrassed. Zektar, we cannot simply impose upon this human woman. Teach you what? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. How to love, Zektar said simply. How to be a family. How to make someone feel safe and wanted and precious. He paused, then added with devastating honesty, how to be what a child needs. Sarah looked between the father and son, seeing the desperation and hope in both their faces. This was so far outside anything she'd ever experienced, but the need she saw was universal. A child who wanted to be loved. A parent who wanted to learn how to provide that love, but didn't know where to start. I'm not a teacher, she said slowly. I'm just a mom. That is exactly what we need, Thane Moore said quietly. A mom. Sarah thought about Emma, safely at school, unaware that her mother was having coffee with aliens. Emma, who had never doubted for a second that she was loved, wanted, and treasured. Emma, who would probably think it was the coolest thing in the world that her mom was friends with aliens. I don't know the first thing about Valerian culture, Sarah said finally. We are willing to learn yours, Thane Moore replied. Sarah looked at Zektar, who was watching her with barely contained hope. And you really think this could work? That a human could teach a Valerian how to parent with love? I know it can work, Zektar said with absolute conviction. Because you already are. Sarah realized he was right. From a moment she'd seen him crying in the parking lot, she'd been treating him exactly as she would any child in distress, with kindness, attention, and care. She'd bought him hot chocolate, listened to his story, and felt genuine concern for his well-being. It hadn't occurred to her to do anything else. This will be temporary, right? She asked. Just until you learn. However long it takes, Thane Moore said. Though I confess, I have no idea how long that might be. We are starting from nothing. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, thinking. This was crazy. Absolutely insane. She was a single mother with a perfectly ordinary life, and these aliens were asking her to teach them how to love their children. It was the kind of thing that happened in science fiction movies, not in small-town diners on Tuesday mornings. But as she looked at Zektar, still clutching his hot chocolate and watching her with those hopeful golden eyes, she realized there was really only one answer she could give. Okay, she said finally. We could try. Zektar's face lit up like the sun, and even Thanemore seemed to relax visibly. But, Sarah continued, I have conditions. First, I need to know more about your culture, your laws, everything. I'm not going into this blind. Second, my daughter Emma comes first always. This can't disrupt her life or put her in any danger. And third, she paused, looking directly at Thanemore. You have to understand that love isn't a technique you can learn and then apply. It's a choice you make every day in 1,000 small ways. Are you prepared for that? I am prepared to learn whatever you are willing to teach, Thanemore said solemnly. And I promise I'll be the best student ever, Zektar added eagerly. Sarah couldn't help but smile. Well then, I guess we'd better start with the basics. Rule number 1. When someone offers to help you, you say thank you. Thank you, both aliens said in unison. You're welcome, Sarah replied, and realized she meant it completely. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, and Sarah knew that by the time it set, her life would be forever changed. She was about to become something she'd never imagined, a teacher of love to an alien species that had never known existed. But as she watched Zektar carefully drink his hot chocolate, making sure to save the marshmallows for last just like Emma always did, she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what she was meant to do. After all, love wasn't really alien at all. It was the most human thing there was. And sometimes the most human thing you could do was share it with someone who needed it, no matter how far they traveled to find it. The hardest part about explaining love to someone who had never experienced it, Sarah discovered, was that she'd never had to think about it consciously before. Love was like breathing, so natural and essential that you didn't really notice you were doing it until someone asked you to explain exactly how your lungs worked. 3 days after their first meeting, Thanemore and Zektar had taken up residence in what appeared to be a sophisticated mobile home that they'd parked, with proper permits, they assured her, in the empty lot behind Miller's Market. Sarah had spent those 3 days researching everything she could find about Valerian culture, and what she'd learned had left her both heartbroken and more determined than ever to help. The Valerian Empire wasn't just a warrior culture. It was a society built on the complete suppression of emotional bonds. Children were removed from their biological parents at birth and raised in communal training facilities. Physical comfort was seen as weakness. Emotional expression was punished. The concept of family, as humans understood it, simply didn't exist. But here's what I don't understand, Sarah said, sitting across from Thanemore in his surprisingly comfortable ship while Zektar explored Emma's collection of picture books. How did you end up with Zektar if children are raised communally? Thanemore's expression grew complicated. Was a high commander. When a Valerian reaches sufficient rank, they are permitted to claim genetic offspring for personal training. It is considered an honor, a chance to shape a future warrior according to one's own specifications. So you chose him? I chose his genetic markers, Thanemore corrected. Strength, intelligence, aggression, potential. I claimed him when he was 6 years old, intending to mold him into the perfect soldier. He paused, watching as Zektar carefully turned the pages of Where the Wild Things Are. I did not expect to find myself attached to him. Sarah felt a familiar tug in her chest. You love him. I experience strong protective impulses regarding his well-being, Thanemore said carefully. I find his presence calming. I worry when he is distressed. I take pride in his accomplishments beyond their tactical value. He looked at Sarah helplessly. I do not know if this constitutes what you call love. It's a pretty good start, Sarah assured him. The fact that you want to learn how to love him better? That's love in action. That afternoon, Sarah had arranged for Emma to come home with her best friend Katie, so she could focus on what she was already thinking of as Love 101. Her first lesson plan was simple. Observe a human family in action. We're going to visit my neighbors, she explained to Thanemore and Zektar as they walked down Maple Street. The Johnsons have 3 kids, ages 5 to 15. I want you to watch how they interact. Don't analyze it. Don't take notes. Just observe. The Johnsons were used to Sarah's occasional visits, but she could see Linda Johnson doing her best not to stare at her unusual companions. To her credit, Linda had simply nodded when Sarah had called ahead to explain that she was helping some friends learn about family dynamics, and would it be okay if they observed for an hour or so? What followed was perhaps the most educational hour of Zektar's young life. They arrived just as 5-year-old Tommy Johnson was having a complete meltdown over the fact that his brother had used the last of the blue marker. Tommy was sprawled on the living room floor, screaming at the top of his lungs, tears streaming down his red face. Zektar instinctively stepped behind his father. "Is the small human injured?" he whispered. "No, sweetie," Sarah said gently. "He's just upset. Watch what happens." Linda Johnson approached her screaming son with patience that Sarah genuinely admired. She didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't try to force Tommy to stop crying. Instead, she sat down on the floor beside him. "I can see you're really upset," Linda said calmly. "Can you tell me what's wrong?" Through his sobs, Tommy managed to explain about the marker. Linda nodded seriously, as if this were a matter of international importance. "That does sound frustrating," she agreed. "I hate it when I can't find the color I want for my artwork. Would you like a hug while we figure out what to do about this?" Tommy nodded and climbed into his mother's lap. Linda held him close, rubbing his back and making soothing sounds until his sobs subsided into hiccups. "Feel a little better?" she asked. Tommy nodded. "Good. Now, let's see if we can solve this marker problem." Zektar watched this entire interaction with fascination bordering on awe. When Tommy was calm, Linda helped him find a different blue marker and praised him for using his words to explain the problem. She didn't mention his earlier tantrum or make him feel ashamed for crying. She didn't punish him for expressing distress. Zektar whispered to Sarah. Why would she? He wasn't being bad. He was just overwhelmed. Sometimes little kids' feelings are too big for them to handle alone. But he disrupted the household. He was inefficient and loud, and he was 5 years old, Sarah said firmly. Being 5 years old isn't a crime. They spent the rest of the visit observing more interactions. 15-year-old Mike showed his mother a B+ on a math test, and instead of pointing out that it was an A, Linda focused on how much he'd improved. 10-year-old Sarah, which led to some amusing confusion, came home with a scraped knee from falling off her bike, and received not lectures about being more careful, but antiseptic, a Band-Aid, and a kiss to make it better. Most remarkably, when the children made mistakes or misbehaved, their parents corrected them with patience and explanation rather than punishment and shame. The goal wasn't to break their spirit or demonstrate dominance. It was to teach them how to do better next time. The adults prioritized the children's emotional well-being over efficiency or dominance displays, Thaymore observed on the walk home. This seems counterproductive from a training perspective. It's not about training, Sarah explained. It's about raising healthy, confident, emotionally stable humans. The goal isn't to create perfect soldiers. It's to help them become the best version of themselves. But what if their best version is weak? What if kindness makes them vulnerable? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. Thaymore, look at me. Do I seem weak to you? He considered this carefully. No, you are remarkably strong. You approached unknown aliens without fear. You defend your values calmly, but firmly. You took on a complex challenge without hesitation. I was raised exactly like those children we just visited. My parents loved me unconditionally, supported my dreams, comforted me when I was hurt, and taught me that my worth wasn't conditional on being perfect. Sarah smiled. Love doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong enough to face anything because you know you're not facing alone. That evening, Sarah invited Thaymore and Zektar for dinner at her house. Emma had been briefed on their friends from far away and had accepted their unusual appearance with the casual adaptability of childhood. Are you really from space? Emma asked Zektar as Sarah served spaghetti and meatballs. Yes, Zektar replied seriously. Very far space, with many stars between here and there. Cool. Do you have a spaceship? Duh. Would you like to see it sometime? Yes. Mom, can I see Zektar's spaceship? Sarah caught Thaymore's eye. They hadn't discussed this possibility, but she could see he was waiting for her response. We'll see, she said diplomatically. Maybe this weekend. Dinner proceeded with the kind of casual conversation that Sarah took for granted, but that clearly fascinated their guests. Emma chatted about her day at school, complained mildly about her math homework, and told elaborate stories about her friend Katie's new kitten. Sarah listened, asked questions, and offered appropriate responses: sympathy for the homework, enthusiasm for the kitten's stories, interest in Emma's description of the substitute teacher. "Why do you ask Emma so many questions about her daily activities?" Faymore asked later, as they cleared the dishes. "Do you require tactical intelligence about her environment?" Sarah laughed. "I ask because I'm interested, because her day matters to me, because I want to know what's going on in her world so I can help her navigate it. But you cannot alter most of these events. Her homework difficulty, her social interactions, her teachers, these are beyond your control. That's not the point. The point is that she knows someone cares about her experiences. She knows that her day matters to someone, that her thoughts and feelings are important." Sarah handed him a dish to dry. Sometimes just being heard is the most important thing. As if to demonstrate this, Emma appeared in the doorway with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I can't figure out this math problem." Sarah immediately set down her dish rag and turned her full attention to her daughter. "Show me, baby." They sat at the kitchen table while Emma explained the problem. Sarah could see the frustration building in her daughter's face. Emma was a perfectionist who hated when things didn't come easily. "This is stupid," Emma said finally, throwing down her pencil. "I'm stupid." "Hey," Sarah said gently. "The problem might be tricky, but you are definitely not stupid. You're smart and creative and amazing. Sometimes our brains just need a different way of looking at things." She helped Emma work through the problem step by step, celebrating each small breakthrough. When Emma finally arrived at the correct answer, Sarah's pride was genuine and visible. "You did it. You worked through a really challenging problem and didn't give up. I'm so proud of you." Emma beamed and ran off to finish the rest of her homework. Sarah turned back to find both aliens watching her with expressions of wonder. "You provided no tactical advantage," Zektar said slowly. "She gained no strength or combat skills from that interaction. But she looked stronger somehow." "She is stronger," Sarah confirmed. "She's stronger because she knows she's capable of working through difficult problems. She's stronger because she knows that struggling doesn't make her stupid or worthless. And she's stronger because she knows that no matter what challenges she faces, she has someone in her corner who believes in her." "This is what you mean by love," Faymore said. It wasn't really a question. Part of it. Love it's choosing to see the best in someone, especially when they can't see it themselves. It's being their safe harbor when the world feels overwhelming. It's celebrating their victories and comforting their defeats and just showing up. Every day, no matter what. Zektar was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he looked up at his father. "Father, when I struggle with combat training, you tell me to be stronger and try harder." Faymore shifted uncomfortably. That is how I was taught to motivate improvement. But Sarah told Emma that struggling doesn't make her stupid. She helped her find a different way to think about the problem instead of just telling her to try harder. "Yes," Faymore said slowly. "She did. Could you try to help me like that? Instead of just telling me to be stronger." Sarah watched Faymore's face as he processed this request. She could see him struggling with concepts that went against everything he'd been taught, but she could also see love, that fierce protective instinct he'd mentioned, winning out over conditioning. "I can try," he said finally, "though I may need guidance. This is very different from what I know." "That's okay," Zektar said, and Sarah heard an echo of every conversation she'd ever had with Emma about trying new things. Learning new stuff is hard, but you don't have to be perfect right away. The look that passed between father and son in that moment was worth every strange turn Sarah's life had taken in the past 3 days. It was the look of two people discovering they could trust each other with their vulnerabilities, their failures, their hopes for something better. It was, Sarah realized, the very beginning of love. Later, after their guests had returned to their ship, Emma cornered Sarah in the kitchen. "Mom, are Faymore and Zektar going to be staying for a while?" "I think so, honey. Is that okay with you?" Emma considered this seriously. Zektar seemed sad. Like underneath happy, he seemed sad. And his dad looked worried all the time. Sarah was constantly amazed by her daughter's emotional intelligence. "They're going through some difficult changes. Sometimes that can feel sad and scary even when it's ultimately good. Are you helping them? I'm trying to. Emma nodded approvingly. Good. Zektar needs a mom, I can tell. And his dad needs to learn how to be a better dad. What makes you think that? The way he looks at Zektar when he thinks nobody's watching. Like he wants to hug him, but doesn't know if he's allowed to. Sarah felt her heart squeeze. Sometimes children saw truths that adults spent years learning to articulate. You know what, Em? I think you're right. And I think maybe we can help them figure it out. Cool. Emma said matter-of-factly. Can I really see their spaceship this weekend? We'll see, Sarah said again, but she was already thinking that maybe a field trip was exactly what their unconventional family needed. Because that's what they were becoming, she realized. Somehow, in the span of 3 days, 2 aliens looking for love had become part of her family. And if that wasn't the most beautifully human thing in the universe, she didn't know what was. 2 weeks into what Sarah was privately calling the Great Love Experiment, she was beginning to understand why the Valerian Empire was so concerned about human contamination. It wasn't that humans were particularly infectious. It was that love, once experienced, was impossible to forget or ignore. The changes in Zektar were remarkable and heartwarming. The sullen, withdrawn child who had first appeared in her parking lot was blossoming into something entirely different. He laughed now. Genuine, delighted laughter that seemed to surprise him every time it happened. He asked questions about everything, from why flowers smelled good to whether dogs dreamed. Most importantly, he had begun to trust that the adults around him had his best interests at heart. Fanemore's transformation was more subtle, but perhaps even more profound. The rigid military bearing was still there, but underneath it, Sarah could see a man learning to be gentle with himself and others. He asked permission before touching his son. He apologized when he made mistakes. He was learning that strength could be tender. The breakthrough moment had come the previous Friday evening. Sarah had been in her kitchen preparing dinner when she heard raised voices from the backyard. Through the window, she could see Fanemore and Zektar in what appeared to be a heated discussion near the garden shed where they'd been working on a project together. You're doing it wrong, Zektar had shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. It's supposed to be a gift for Sarah, and you're making it ugly. Sarah had started toward the door, but something made her pause and watch instead. Fanemore's first instinct was clearly to respond with authority. She could see his posture straighten, his voice taking on the commanding tone he used when falling back on military training. Zektar, you will not speak to me with such disrespect. A warrior does not. But then he stopped. Sarah watched as he took a deep breath, consciously relaxing his shoulders. When he spoke again, his voice was completely different. Zektar, I can see you're frustrated. I'm frustrated too. This project is important to both of us, and we want to be perfect for Sarah. He knelt down to his son's level, something that would have been unthinkable in Valerian culture. Can you help me understand what you think would make it better? The change in Zektar was immediate. His defensive posture melted away, replaced by enthusiasm as he explained his vision for the birdhouse they'd been building. Together, they redesigned their approach, with Fanemore listening carefully to his son's ideas and incorporating them into their plan. Sarah had watched this exchange with tears in her eyes, knowing she was witnessing something revolutionary. A Valerian warrior choosing connection over dominance, vulnerability over control. Now, 2 weeks later, such moments were becoming more common. Fanemore was learning to recognize his son's emotional needs and respond to them with patience rather than authority. Zektar was learning to trust that his feelings were valid and that expressing them wouldn't result in punishment. But it was Thursday afternoon when Sarah realized just how far they'd all come and how much further they still had to go. She was working in her home office when Emma burst through the door without knocking, always a sign of either excitement or crisis. Mom, you need to come quick, Emma said urgently. Something's wrong with Zektar. Sarah immediately followed Emma to the backyard, where they found Zektar huddled behind the garden shed, his whole body shaking. Fanemore was crouched nearby, looking helpless and increasingly distressed. What happened? Sarah asked, dropping to her knees beside the terrified child. I don't know, Fanemore said, his usual composed demeanor cracking. He was playing with Emma, they were laughing, and then suddenly he just collapsed and began shaking. I cannot determine the cause of injury or threat. Sarah gently reached out to touch Zektar's shoulder. "Hey, sweetie, it's Sarah. Can you hear me?" Zektar raised his head, and Sarah immediately recognized what she was seeing. Panic attack. She'd had them herself after her divorce, and she'd seen Emma have one after a particularly difficult day at school the year before. "Zektar, honey, you're having a panic attack. You're safe, okay? You're in my backyard with people who care about you. Can you try to breathe with me?" She began demonstrating slow, deep breathing, counting out loud. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. That's it, you're doing great." Gradually, Zektar's breathing slowed and the shaking subsided. When he was calm enough to speak, his first words broke Sarah's heart. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know warriors don't break down. I know it's shameful. I'll accept whatever punishment." "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "There is no punishment because you didn't do anything wrong. Panic attacks happen to lots of people, including very strong, very brave people. They're not a sign of weakness. They're a sign that your mind is trying to protect you from something that feels overwhelming." She sat back on her heels, studying his face. "Can you tell me what you were thinking about right before this started?" Zektar looked at his father uncertainly, then back at Sarah. "Emma and I were talking about school. She asked if I would go to school here with her. And I realized," his voice got very small, "I realized I don't know how long we're staying. I don't know if this is permanent or if one day Father will decide I've learned enough and we'll go back to Valor." Sarah felt her own chest tighten. This was the conversation she'd been avoiding, the question that had been lurking beneath all their progress. "And going back to Valor feels scary," she prompted gently. "Going back feels like dying," Zektar said simply. "Not the dying where your body stops working. The dying where you have to forget how to feel loved and safe and like you matter for who you are instead of what you can do." Faymore made a sound that might have been a sob. Sarah looked at him and saw a parent's worst nightmare. The realization that the world he'd been preparing his child for was a world that would destroy everything beautiful about that child. "Father," Zektar said hesitantly, "are we going back?" For a long moment, Faymore didn't answer. Sarah could practically see the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus love, tradition versus growth, the familiar versus the unknown. "I don't know," he said finally, and Sarah respected him for his honesty, even as her heart ached for them both. "I came here seeking to learn something that would help you adapt to Valerian expectations. But what I'm learning, it cannot coexist with those expectations." He stood abruptly and began pacing, his agitation visible in every movement. "On Valor, the changes I see in you would be seen as contamination, weakness, failure. You would be subjected to reconditioning protocols designed to eliminate emotional responses. You would be—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "You would be broken," Zektar said quietly. "Broken back into what they think I should be." "Yes." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, not at Faymore, but at a system that would deliberately traumatize children in the name of strength. "And what do you think you should be?" she asked Zektar. "I think I should be myself," he said with a certainty that was breathtaking. "I think I should be someone who can be brave and scared, strong and gentle, a warrior, and someone who loves flowers and laughs at him as jokes, and want to hug his father when he's proud of me." Faymore stopped pacing and stared at his son. That is not what Valerian warriors are." "Then, maybe I don't want to be a Valerian warrior," Zektar said. "Maybe I want to be something new." The silence that followed this statement was profound. Sarah could feel the weight of generations of conditioning being challenged by one brave child's simple declaration of self-determination. Emma, who had been listening quietly from the garden gate, chose that moment to speak up. "My mom always says that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." All three adults turned to look at her. Emma shrugged with 8-year-old wisdom. "Sounds to me like Zektar's being pretty brave right now." "She's right," Sarah said softly. "Zektar, what you just said, choosing to be yourself even when it's difficult or dangerous, that's one of the bravest things I've ever heard." Faymore sank down onto the garden bench, looking suddenly exhausted. "But what does that leave us? I cannot take him back to Valor as he is now. But I cannot simply abandon my duties, my people. What if there was a third option?" Sarah suggested carefully. "What if instead of taking human love back to Valor, you brought Valerian strength here to Earth? Both aliens looked at her with confusion. I mean, what if you stayed? What if you applied for refugee status or asylum or whatever the equivalent is for aliens? What if you chose to build a life here where Zektar could be both strong and loving? Defection, Famor said immediately. What you describe would be considered treason. I will be hunted. We both would. By who? You said yourself that Valerian children across the Empire are experiencing these same changes. How many parents are in the same situation you're in? How many are struggling with the same choice between their children's well-being and their society's expectations? Sarah could see the idea taking root in Fainmore's mind. You think we would not be alone in this choice? I think revolutions start with individuals choosing love over fear. And I think maybe, just maybe, the Valerian Empire is ready for a revolution. They talked for another hour, exploring possibilities and challenges. The conversation was interrupted when Emma announced she was hungry and shouldn't they all go inside for snacks because thinking hard always made her hungry. As they gathered around Sarah's kitchen table with cookies and milk and a Valerian energy drink that Famor insisted was more nutritious, Sarah watched the easy interaction between Emma and Zektar and felt something settle in her chest. You know, she said suddenly, I've been thinking about something Zektar said that first day. About wanting a mom. Both aliens looked at her with sudden attention. The thing is, I never had a son. Just Emma. And watching you two learn to love each other, seeing Zektar grow and thrive, it's been amazing. You've both become so important to me. She took a deep breath, knowing she was about to change all their lives irrevocably. If you decide to stay, if you want to build a life here, I'd like you to know that you'll always have a place in our family. Not as guests or students, but as family. Real family. Zektar's eyes went wide. You mean you would be my mom? My real mom. If you want me to be. The hug that followed nearly knocked Sarah off her chair. Zektar wrapped his arms around her with desperate gratitude, and she held him close, marveling at how perfectly he fit against her shoulder. I love you, Mom, he whispered, and Sarah's heart exploded with joy. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. When they finally separated, she looked at Famor, who was watching them with an expression of wonder and gratitude, and something else that made her pulse quicken. And you, she said to him, would be welcome to stay too, as part of our family, if that's something you'd want. Famor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Sarah-chun, you have given me back my son. You have taught me how to love and be loved. You have shown me that strength and gentleness can coexist, that vulnerability is not weakness, that caring for others is the highest form of courage. He paused, then added with devastating honesty, I cannot imagine a life without these lessons, without this family, without you. Emma, who had been following this conversation with rapt attention, suddenly clapped her hands. So, we're all going to be a family? Like officially? If everyone wants that, Sarah said, looking around the table at these three people who had somehow become the center of her world. Yes, Zektar said immediately. Yes, Famor agreed, though Sarah could see the fear and determination warring in his eyes as he committed to a choice that would irrevocably change his life. Cool, Emma said with satisfaction. Does this mean Zektar is going to go to school with me? If he wants to, Sarah said. Can I learn to drive your spaceship? Emma asked Famor. Perhaps when you are older, he replied with the first genuine laugh Sarah had heard from him. As the evening wound down and they began discussing practical matters, paperwork, housing, schooling, the myriad details of building a life together, Sarah realized that somewhere along the way, her simple Tuesday morning coffee run had turned into the greatest adventure of her life. She was now the mother of two children, one human and one alien. She was in love with a warrior from the stars who was learning to be gentle. She was part of a family that had been impossible just weeks ago. And the most amazing part was that it all felt completely natural, as if this was exactly what was always supposed to happen. As if love, once again, had found a way to bridge any distance, overcome any obstacle, and create something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. Outside, night was falling, and somewhere among the stars, the Valerian Empire continued on its path of conquest and emotional suppression, unaware that their greatest weapon had just chosen love over duty. But in Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by the warm chaos of family life, Revolution was brewing, one bedtime story, one shared meal, one moment of unconditional love at a time. The Valerian High Command arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 6 weeks after Sarah's life had first been disrupted by aliens in a grocery store parking lot. She would later reflect on the irony that her belief about Tuesdays being boring had been both spectacularly wrong and oddly prophetic, because while this particular Tuesday was anything but boring, it was definitely the most important day of her life. Sarah was in her garden, teaching Zektar how to plant tomato seeds, when the sky above their quiet suburban streets split open with a sound like thunder. A massive ship, easily 10 times the size of Thanemore's modest vessel, descended through the clouds, its dark hull bristling with weapons that looked designed to level cities. "Mom," Zektar whispered, pressing close to her side. The word still gave Sarah a thrill of joy, even in circumstances like these. "I know, baby. It's going to be okay." She wrapped her arms around him protectively, though she wasn't sure how much protection she could offer against a warship. Thanemore appeared at a dead run from the direction of his ship, his face grim. "Sarah, take the children inside. Now, what's happening?" "The High Command has found us." His voice was tight with controlled fear. "They've come to retrieve Zektar and myself for debriefing." Sarah didn't need him to explain what Valerian debriefing would entail. She'd learned enough about their culture to know that failure was met with reconditioning at best, elimination at worst. And Thanemore's mission, to find a way to suppress the growing emotional awareness among Valerian children, had not only failed but had resulted in his own complete defection. "Emma," Sarah called toward the house. "Come here, please." Emma appeared on the back porch, took one look at the massive ship hovering overhead, and ran to join them. "Whoa, that's way bigger than Thanemore's ship." "Yes, it is. I need you both to go inside and stay away from the windows." "No," Zektar said firmly. "I won't hide while they threaten our family." "Zektar, this isn't a game. These are dangerous people who want to take you away from everything you've learned here." "Then, we need to show them why that would be wrong," he said with a determination that reminded Sarah powerfully of both his father's strength and Emma's stubborn streak. Before Sarah could respond, 3 figures materialized in her backyard through some kind of transport beam. All wore the ornate armor of Valerian High Command, their helmet designs indicating ranks that Sarah didn't recognize, but that made Thanemore stiffen to attention. The center figure, clearly the leader, removed her helmet to reveal a female Valerian with scales so dark they were almost black and eyes like chips of ice. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. "High Commander Thanemore," she said in flawless English. "I am Supreme General Vexana. You will explain why you have failed to report for 6 weeks, and why our sensors detect massive contamination in your offspring." Thanemore stepped forward, positioning himself between the general and his family. "Supreme General, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," Vexana interrupted. "You were tasked with finding a solution to the emotional contamination spreading through our youth. Instead, our long-range scans indicate you have become contaminated yourself." Her gaze moved to Zektar, and Sarah felt her maternal instincts flare at the cold assessment in those eyes. "The child will be subjected to immediate reconditioning protocols. You will face trial for dereliction of duty." "No," Thanemore said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the other 2 Valorians react with shock. Clearly, no one said no to Supreme General Vexana. "Explain your refusal to comply with direct orders." Thanemore straightened, and Sarah saw him make the conscious choice to abandon everything he had been in favor of everything he was becoming. "I refuse because what you call contamination, I call growth. What you call weakness, I call strength. My son is not broken. He is whole in a way that Valerian society never allowed him to be." Vexana's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the subtle shift in her posture that suggested dangerous anger. "You have been compromised by human emotional manipulation. This is precisely why we maintained strict protocols against extended contact with their species." "This isn't manipulation," Sarah said, stepping forward despite Thanemore's protective gesture. "It's love." For the first time, Vexana looked directly at Sarah. You are the human responsible for this contamination. I'm the human who taught a father how to love his son. I'm the human who showed a child that his worth isn't conditional on being a perfect soldier." If that's contamination, then, yes, I'm responsible. Mom, don't antagonize the scary alien lady, Emma whispered loudly. Despite the tension, Sarah caught the hint of a smile on one of the other Valorians' faces before it was quickly suppressed. Your species' approach to offspring development is inefficient and produces weak, emotionally unstable individuals, Vexana continued, as if Emma hadn't spoken. Valerian methods create perfect warriors. Do they? Sarah asked. Because from what I've seen, Valerian methods create traumatized children who grow up to traumatize their own children. That's not strength, that's a cycle of damage. Zektar stepped out from behind his father. Supreme General Vexana, may I speak? Vexana looked startled that he would address her directly. In Valerian culture, children spoke only when spoken to, and certainly never to a Supreme General. You may, she said after a pause. Before I came to Earth, I was afraid all the time. I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of showing weakness, afraid of disappointing my superiors. I thought this fear made me strong, but it didn't. It made me small. Zektar's voice grew stronger as he continued. Here, I learned that real strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing your fears because you have something worth fighting for. It's about protecting people you love, not because you're ordered to, but because you choose to. He looked at his father with pure love in his eyes. My father didn't become weak when he learned to love me. He became the strongest person I know. He chose to risk everything, his career, his safety, his entire way of life, because he decided I was worth it. Vexana's expression remained impassive, but Sarah noticed that the other two Valorians were listening intently. And Sarah didn't make me weak by loving me, Zektar continued. She made me brave enough to be myself. She taught me that I don't have to choose between being strong and being kind. I can be both. Emotional bonds make soldiers unreliable, Vexana stated. They prioritize individual attachments over duty to the Empire. Maybe that's because the Empire hasn't given them anything worth being loyal to. Emma piped up, then looked confused when everyone stared at her. What? It's true. Who wants to fight for people who are mean to kids? Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. Sometimes children cut right to the heart of things that adults spent years dancing around. One of the other Valorians, a male with lieutenant's markings, spoke for the first time. Supreme General, if I may, the child makes a valid point. Loyalty born of fear is brittle. Loyalty born of choice is unbreakable. Vexana's head snapped toward him. Lieutenant Corval, you forget your place. With respect, Supreme General, I do not. I am thinking of the Empire's future. His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the courage it took for him to continue. Our current methods are producing increasing numbers of emotionally compromised youth. Perhaps we should examine whether the contamination is truly a weakness, or if it represents an evolution we should consider. Treasonous thinking, Vexana said coldly. Is it strategic thinking? The third Valerian, a female with commander's insignia, joined the conversation. Supreme General, our traditional methods are failing. Child soldiers are becoming increasingly difficult to train. Suicide rates among youth have increased sevenfold in the past year. Desertion is at an all-time high. Sarah felt a chill at the casual mention of child suicide rates. What kind of society had they created that their children were choosing death over continued participation? Our strength has always been our unity, the commander continued. But unity built on suppression is fragile. Perhaps unity built on choice would serve us better. Vexana looked between her subordinates, her expression unreadable. You suggest that we abandon millennia of successful tradition based on the observations of one contaminated unit? I suggest that we consider whether our traditions are still serving us, Lieutenant Corval replied. And perhaps we should observe the results of this contamination firsthand before dismissing it. Sarah held her breath. She could sense that this conversation had become about much more than just her family's fate. Thamor stepped forward. Supreme General, I propose a demonstration. What kind of demonstration? A test of the children. Both Zektar and Emma. Test their problem-solving abilities, their courage under pressure, their loyalty to those they care about. Compare the results to what you would expect from traditionally trained Valerian youth. Sarah's protective instinct screamed against using her children as test subjects, but She could see the strategic wisdom in Thanemore's suggestion. If they could prove that love made children stronger, not weaker. What did you have in mind? She asked carefully. A simulation, Thanemore explained. A crisis scenario that would require courage, quick thinking, and cooperation. Let the Supreme General observe how children raised with love respond compared to children raised with traditional methods. Vexana considered this. And if they fail, then you take us both back to valor for reconditioning, Thanemore said quietly. But if they succeed, you consider that perhaps there is value in what we've learned here. Sarah wanted to protest, to refuse to put her children at risk. But she could see that this might be their only chance to prove their point, to save not just Zektar, but potentially countless other Valerian children. What kind of simulation? She asked. A rescue scenario, the commander suggested. Multiple challenges requiring different skills. Physical courage, emotional resilience, strategic thinking, cooperation. I'll do it, Zektar said immediately. Me too, Emma added. Besides, it sounds fun. Sarah looked at her daughter with amazement. Only Emma would think that being tested by alien generals sounded like fun. If we do this, Sarah said to Vexana, I have conditions. Nothing that could actually harm them. I observe the entire time. And if they succeed, you don't just consider our approach. You let other Valerian families have the same choice we've made. Vexana was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. Acceptable. Prepare your simulation, Commander Silin. We begin in 1 hour. As the Valorians departed to set up their test, Sarah gathered her family close. Are you sure about this? She asked. I'm sure, Zektar said firmly. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about every Valerian child who cries themselves to sleep because they don't understand why no one loves them. Emma nodded seriously. Besides, we're really good at working together. Remember when we built that super complicated Lego castle? Sarah laughed despite her fear. Trust Emma to compare an alien trial that could determine the fate of an entire generation to a Lego project. Okay, she said. But remember, you're not just representing yourselves. You're representing the idea that love makes us stronger, not weaker. You're proving that kindness is a superpower. We know, Mom, both children said in unison. And Sarah realized that somehow, in just 6 weeks, Emma had gained a brother, and Zektar had gained a sister, and together they were about to change the course of galactic history. The test that followed would be talked about for generations among the Valorians. But in that moment, standing in her garden with her impossible family, Sarah just held them close and whispered a prayer that love would be enough. It had to be enough, because everything depended on it. The simulation chamber that Commander Silin materialized in Sarah's backyard was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It was a perfect cube of shimmering energy about the size of a large room that somehow contained what appeared to be a complex multi-level structure with moving platforms, holographic obstacles, and various challenge stations. The scenario is this, Commander Silin explained as the group gathered around the chamber's perimeter. 2 civilians are trapped in a damaged facility during an emergency. Multiple systems have failed. To escape, they must navigate physical obstacles, solve technical problems, overcome fear-inducing situations, and work together. They have 30 minutes. Sarah studied the challenge course, her heart clenching as she recognized elements specifically designed to test the things Valerian culture prized. Individual strength, tactical thinking, emotional suppression under stress, and dominance hierarchy establishment. What happens if they don't make it out in time? She asked. The simulation ends, Vexana replied. No physical harm will come to them. But failure will be instructive. Zektar and Emma stood at the chamber entrance, holding hands. Sarah was struck by how small they looked next to the imposing alien technology, but also by how absolutely unafraid they seemed. Remember, Sarah called to them, you're not competing against each other. You're working together. We know, Mom, Emma called back cheerfully. We've got this. Be brave, be smart, and be kind, Zektar added, repeating the motto Sarah had taught them both. The chamber sealed, and the simulation began. Sarah watched through the transparent walls as her children found themselves in what appeared to be a damaged space station. Emergency lights flashed, alarms blared, and smoke billowed from various vents. The first challenge was immediately apparent. They needed to reach an upper level, but the main stairway had collapsed, leaving only a series of narrow beams and unstable platforms. Traditional approach would be for the stronger individual to go first, establish dominance, and lead, Lieutenant Corval murmured, clearly providing commentary for his superior's benefit. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, Sarah watched as Emma and Zektar had a quick conversation. Then Zektar boosted Emma up to the first platform. Emma, being smaller and more agile, was able to test the stability of each beam before Zektar followed. When they reached a gap too wide for Emma to cross alone, Zektar didn't simply jump across and leave her behind. He found a broken pipe that could serve as a bridge and helped her across. "They're taking longer than necessary," Vexana observed. The male could have completed this section in half the time alone. But then the female would be left behind, Commander Sillin pointed out. Mission parameters specify that both civilians must escape. In traditional training, the stronger trainee takes priority. The weaker is acceptable losses. Sarah bit back her response to that statement, but she noticed that Lieutenant Corval looked deeply uncomfortable. The second challenge appeared to be a technical puzzle, some kind of control panel with alien symbols that needed to be activated in the correct sequence to restore power to a section of the facility. Sarah watched as both children studied the panel. "I can't read these symbols," Emma said. "I can read some of them," Zektar replied, "but I don't understand the technical concepts behind them." Traditional Valerian approach would be for the one with superior knowledge to take control while the others stepped aside. Instead, Sarah watched as her children worked out a system where Zektar read the symbols aloud and Emma, with her puzzle-solving skills, worked out the logical sequence. "The female should defer to the male's superior knowledge," Vexana stated. "But the male's knowledge is incomplete," Sarah replied. "Together, they have everything they need to solve the problem." "Inefficient." "Effective," Sarah corrected, as the panel lit up green and the children cheered their success. The third challenge nearly broke Sarah's heart. The simulation presented the children with what appeared to be a trapped victim, a holographic alien child who was crying and appeared to be injured. The catch was that stopping to help would cost precious time, and there was no guarantee they could actually save the victim. Sarah watched as Emma immediately started toward the crying child, while Zektar hesitated, clearly torn between the mission objective and his compassion. "Now we will see," Vexana said with satisfaction. Emotional responses lead to mission failure. They will waste time on a victim they cannot save and doom themselves in the process. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, Sarah watched as Zektar quickly assessed the situation. The victim was trapped under debris that would take both of them to move, but there was a way to reroute power to that section that would activate an automated rescue system. "Emma," he called, "if we can restore power to Sector 7, the emergency systems will free him automatically." "How do we do that?" Emma asked, already moving toward the indicated control station. "I think we can reroute power from the systems we just fixed, but it means this section will go dark again." "That's okay," Emma said without hesitation. "We can find another way through." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her children choose to sacrifice their own safety and convenience to help someone else, not because they were ordered to, but because it was the right thing to do. "They're sabotaging their own mission," Vexana observed, but her tone had shifted slightly. She sounded less satisfied and more curious. The power reroute worked, and the automated systems freed the holographic victim. But now Emma and Zektar were in darkness with limited time and had to find an alternate route to the exit. "This is where fear typically overwhelms young trainees," Lieutenant Corval commented. "Darkness, time pressure, unknown obstacles." Sarah held her breath as she watched her children navigate the darkened passages. Emma was clearly afraid. Sarah could see her trembling, but Zektar stayed close to her, offering comfort and encouragement. "It's okay," he said gently. "I can see better in the dark than you can. I'll guide you. Just hold my hand." "What if we don't make it out?" Emma asked, voicing the fear they were all feeling. "Then we don't make it out," Zektar replied matter-of-factly. "But we'll have done our best, and we'll have helped someone who needed it. That's what matters." "The male is allowing emotion to compromise mission efficiency," Vexana stated, but Sarah noticed she didn't sound entirely convinced anymore. The male is ensuring unit cohesion, Commander Silla countered. A frightened teammate is a liability. A supported teammate is an asset. The final challenge appeared as they approached the exit. A choice, two possible routes out, but they could only see partway down each path. One appeared clear, but narrow. Only one person could fit through at a time. The other was wider, but had visible obstacles and dangers. Traditional Valerian thinking would be to split up, each taking the path best suited to their individual abilities. The stronger would take the dangerous path, the weaker would take the clear path, and whoever made it out first would complete the mission. Instead, Sarah watched as Emma and Zektar had another quick conference. I think that narrow path is a trap, Emma said. It's too easy. There's probably something bad we can't see. I think you're right, Zektar agreed. The harder path is probably actually safer, but it's designed for someone bigger and stronger than me. That's okay. We'll figure it out together. They chose the difficult path, and Sarah watched as they encountered obstacle after obstacle that required both their skills to overcome. Zektar's strength and Emma's agility, his knowledge and her creativity, his courage and her empathy. When they finally emerged from the simulation with 3 minutes to spare, they were both exhausted, dirty, and triumphant. We did it, Emma shouted, throwing her arms around her brother. We helped everyone, Zektar added, spinning her around. As the simulation chamber dissolved, Sarah ran to embrace her children, her heart bursting with pride and relief. You were amazing, she told them. Both of you. I am so proud. Did we prove it? Zektar asked anxiously. Did we show them that love makes us stronger? Sarah looked over at the Valerian officers, who were engaged in intense conversation. Vexana's expression was unreadable, but Lieutenant Corval and Commander Sillin both looked deeply affected by what they'd witnessed. Finally, Vexana approached them. The children succeeded in the mission parameters, she stated formally. They did more than succeed, Commander Sillin added. They excelled. Their cooperation, problem-solving abilities, and moral decision-making were superior to anything I've observed in traditionally trained youth of comparable age. They chose to help others at personal cost, Lieutenant Corval added quietly. They supported each other through fear and uncertainty. They succeeded not despite their emotional bonds, but because of them. Vexana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she was making a decision that would reshape her entire worldview. I've spent my career believing that emotion was weakness, she said slowly. That attachment led to poor judgment. That loyalty born of fear was more reliable than loyalty born of choice. She paused, looking at Emma and Zektar. These children have demonstrated otherwise. She turned to Thane Moore. Hi, Commander. Your mission was to find a solution to the emotional contamination affecting our youth. I believe you have found it, though not in the way either of us expected. Supreme General, the contamination is not a disease to be cured. It is an evolution to be embraced. What these children possess, this capacity for love, for loyalty born of choice rather than fear, for courage in service of others, this is not weakness. This is the strength our empire has been lacking. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. Therefore, Vexana continued, I'm authorizing a new initiative. Voluntary family units. Valerian parents who wish to learn these human methods of child rearing will be permitted to do so. Traditional training will remain available for those who prefer it, but it will no longer be mandatory. She looked directly at Sarah, and I am formally requesting that Earth consider establishing cultural exchange programs. We have much to learn from your species about the strength that comes from love. Lieutenant Corval stepped forward. Supreme General, if I may, I would like to volunteer for this exchange program. I have offspring of my own, and after witnessing this demonstration, as would I, Commander Sillin added. The results speak for themselves. Vikana nodded. Very well. High Commander Thane Moore, you will oversee this initiative. Your family will serve as the prototype. Our family, Zektar corrected gently. Thane Moore is my father, Sarah is my mother, and Emma is my sister. We're all family. For the first time since her arrival, Vexana smiled. It transformed her entire face. Yes, your family. As the Valerian officers departed to begin making arrangements for this unprecedented cultural shift, Sarah found herself alone with her family in her backyard, trying to process what had just happened. "Did we just accidentally start an interstellar revolution?" she asked weakly. "I think so," Moore replied, pulling her into his arms. "A revolution of the heart." "Cool," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Can we have pizza for dinner? World-changing makes me hungry." 6 months later, Sarah's quiet suburban neighborhood had become an unlikely hub of interstellar diplomacy. 3 more Valerian families had joined the exchange program, and her house had become an informal training center for alien parents learning to love their children. Sarah often reflected on the strange turns her life had taken since that Tuesday morning when she'd met a crying alien child in a parking lot. She'd never intended to become an ambassador for love, a teacher of revolution, or the adoptive mother of an alien son. But as she watched Zektar help Emma with her homework while Moore prepared dinner in the kitchen, their voices mixing in the casual symphony of family life, she realized that sometimes the most important revolutions started with the simplest acts of kindness. Love, it turned out, really was the most powerful force in the universe. It could bridge any distance, overcome any obstacle, and transform any heart willing to be opened. And sometimes that transformation could change the fate of entire civilizations. "Mom," Zektar called from the living room. "Emma needs help with her math again." "Be right there, sweetie." Sarah hashtagged the hook that changes everything. Sarah Chun never expected her Tuesday morning coffee to be interrupted by a 7-foot-tall alien warrior begging her to marry his mother. But when 12-year-old Zektar, the Valerian Empire, grabbed her sleeve with tears streaming down his scaled face and whispered, "Please, human lady, my mom needs someone who understands kindness," she realized that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. They're won with cookies, Band-Aids, and the fierce protective love that only a mother can provide. What happens when a species built for conquest discovers that their greatest weakness isn't military might, but the absence of something humans take for granted: unconditional maternal love? And what happens when one human mom accidentally becomes the most dangerous person in the galaxy? Not because she can destroy worlds, but because she can heal them. This is the story of how humanity's greatest export wasn't technology, weapons, or even democracy. It was something far more powerful: the simple, revolutionary concept that someone should love you just because you exist,